I mean, you go into Bucha and, every single building has been destroyed. I mean, you can see they deliberately targeted civilian houses, and not just simply sort of slightly damaging or damaging them, literally just flattening them. They're just rubble sort of everywhere. But obviously for me, the most shocking thing was seeing a mass war grave, and a mass grave which I think had over 400 people in it. Now, by the time I got there, they'd removed the bodies.
Welcome to Political Sandbox by Chamber for today's video with former MP and Minister for Civil Society Brooks Newmark. Brooks has been in Ukraine helping with the refugee effort, so he's here to discuss his work. So thank you for coming in, Brooks.
Delighted. A little tired, but delighted.
Tired, I can imagine, yeah. Got every right to be. We've seen you on the news, obviously, in the last few weeks, discussing what you've been doing to help women and children in Ukraine. There's been some reports that you've almost single-handedly saved 7,500 women and children. Can you just run us through exactly why this particular conflict spoke to you and why you were so keen to sort of physically go to Ukraine and offer your support and do the work that you've been doing?
I've always had an interest in post-conflict society. So my initial interest began 15 years ago in Rwanda. And they were trying to rebuild their country. An important part of that is education. So I started an education charity, built a school there, built a teacher training center. And so that's been my primary interest. The Syrian war came along. I took an interest in that. I worked at a refugee camp on the Turkish border. And so, I'm someone who's very hands-on. I can't just sort of write a check and think, okay, I've done my bit. I just feel this urge within me to do something. And in fact, I'm doing a doctorate at the moment on education in Rwanda. And I had just finished my field research, and I noticed a friend of mine had a bus on the border of Poland and was shuttling refugees to Germany and France and Latvia. And he'd only been there 3 days. So I said, can I come and join you? And so I sort of did. And I thought I was going to go out for 3 or 4 days, but 3 or 4 days became a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. Eventually, I think roughly 7.5 weeks I was there. So I didn't go with the intention of thinking, gosh, I'm going to move 7,500 people or even 2,000 people. I didn't know. It was just that over time, and given particularly when I got engaged inside of Ukraine, you realize there's so much to do that I just ended up doing it. Now, it's obviously, I'm not physically driving buses, just to be clear on that. But what I am doing is working with 2 big bus companies. And there's 2 other people, both from Latvia, that I'm working with. One is now in Ukraine, was with me. The other one is back in Latvia. And we're really working with local governments to find out where there is a need to move people to safety. And so having identified where the vulnerable people are, we then would organize for the buses to go there. Right. And that's sort of really what I've been doing.
Okay, so where in Ukraine did you sort of start off with, helping people back into Poland, and where was your sort of journey through Ukraine? Where did you end up seeing?
Yeah, it's very much a west to east journey. Right. So we started off in Lviv and Kyiv. Why those 2 areas? Because that's where the Russians were bombing initially in the first 2 weeks, if you remember. So people were, literally there were hundreds of thousands of people trying to get out. They couldn't get on the trains. There wasn't enough transportation. So we started by providing 3 buses, which we brought in from Lithuania. And, we were moving people. As eventually the Ukrainians pushed the Russians out of that area back into Belarus, things freed up a bit. And so the pressure point then moved away from Lviv and Kyiv to more to the center of the country in the south. So we moved to Vinnytsia and Zaporizhia. Why those 2 areas? Because there were lots of people from Mariupol who then needed to get out. They couldn't get all the way to Lviv. And so we started then busing people from those 2 areas, Vinnytsia and Zaporizhia, to Lviv. They could then either visit friends, family, relatives in the west part of the country, or get on the trains, which were more functioning much better at that point, go into Poland. as the war moved further east, we then started to go to Dnipro and Kharkiv. The problem in those areas was that rumors began to emerge that the Russians were busing people against their will into Russia.
Right.
So I had to go down and do a promotional video, effectively, to show that this was a British initiative. I was interviewed by local TV. The local mayor was there. The families were there with their husbands who were army people. And so we did what really was a promotional video, although it was on the local TV, of this, crazy Brit, who is he, down there helping people get out for free.
Yeah.
So this led to the big issue was that it was for free. And nobody believed that we would do something for free. And so that's why we had to do this promotional video saying, yes, it is for free, and this is why, and this is who I am, and this is why I'm trying to help you. The other issue was going to Kharkiv in particular. So one bus company just simply refused to do that because it's effectively in a war zone. And a number of the bus drivers in the other company were nervous about going. So I spoke to a couple of people I knew in Kharkiv and figured it was safe enough for me to go. And I wanted to sort of show that if I'm prepared to go there, you should also be prepared to go there. So I went out there, and then I went with one of the buses. We went south for 2.5 hours of Kharkiv around Izium. And Izium is where, around those villages where there's been a huge amount of violence and brutality and bombing by the Russians. And we picked up a group of people there. And I think leading by example, gave the confidence to other bus drivers, to feel it's okay to go there. So we're doing a lot of work moving people out, particularly from Kharkiv at the moment, because the Russians are, imagine like the M25 going around London. There's like a ring road around Kharkiv, and the Russians are just on the other side of that. So, so when I was in Kharkiv, I would be sitting there, it'd be dead silence, and I'd be hearing the bombs going off in the distance, and you see a plume of smoke. Yeah. But it was a little surreal, and I didn't feel, oddly enough, I just didn't feel in danger. I don't know why, but that's how I felt.
Yeah, so just sort of on that, were there, obviously you're going into Ukraine, it's obviously going to be quite a dangerous situation, but were there any sort of precautions that you took when you went in there to keep yourself and the other people safe? Did you coordinate with the government or anything like that? Or?
Yeah, I'm if nothing, a little impulsive, so I'd figure my way once I was there. Yeah. The important thing about which we did at the beginning, was having our own drivers sort of in Ukraine, was that we needed to work with the national bus companies because they knew which were the best roads to take and how to navigate the checkpoints and everything else. So we did quickly switch to using these two national bus companies, and they were happy because we're giving them business. Yeah, we're paying for everything. We're a good credit. But I think importantly as well, we took the names and numbers of all the people who take our buses, and we would do random checks to make sure they weren't asked for money. Right. Because right. Yeah. We were very nervous that even though we were providing it for free, there may be people along the way who might ask them for money. And and luckily, I have to say, not a single person has been asked for money, which is great, which to me is testimony to the bus companies and the drivers themselves, that they've been very straightforward, very honest, and doing this for us at a great rate. I mean, there's one story I heard of a bus going from Kyiv to Belarus. They charged $40,000 for the bus. Now, to me, I've been paying between $2,000 and $4,000 per bus, which is great because it works out to about $20 to $40 per person, which we pay for. Yeah. I mean, it's phenomenal that you've been able to do that for that amount and been able to provide that for so many people. Obviously, we just mentioned sort of a little earlier Kharkiv, which has been in the news quite a lot. But I just wanted to move on slightly to Bucha, which has also been in the news quite a lot. I know that you've been there. I think you've seen. So I was just going to ask what your sort of first-hand account of that was. Because we've seen a lot about war crimes being mentioned in Bucha. I was wondering if you'd seen anything of that and what your experience was of that city. Yeah, I mean, you go into Bucha and every single building has been destroyed. I mean, you can see they deliberately targeted civilian houses, and not just simply sort of slightly damaging or damaging, literally just flattening them. They're just rubble sort of everywhere. But obviously for me, the most shocking thing was seeing a mass war grave, and a mass grave which I think had over 400 people in it. Now, by the time I got there, they removed the bodies. But this is a site of a war crime. But it's not just war graves or sites of war crimes. Targeting civilians is a war crime in itself. So in many ways, I am a witness to war crimes. And it's very important that anybody who goes into any of these areas catalogs. So I've taken photos of buildings that were attacked and stuff. We're all witnesses to that. And eventually there will be, I hope, a day of reckoning, and that everybody should be feeding in this evidence to whatever center is collecting this.
Yeah, exactly. So just going back sort of to your work specifically in Ukraine, the work that you've been doing with other European countries and just sort of the work that European countries have been providing, what do you think of the European effort to help Ukraine, and what do you think of their support that they've been providing? I know that you've been working a bit with Poland and trying to get people to the Polish border. What do you think of the European effort? Do you think certain countries are doing better, and are there any countries that we should be taking, as the UK, taking like a cue from? Should we be trying to follow anybody else's approach on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I would say that Poles have been amazing. So yes. Out of 4.5 million refugees, I think they've taken 2.5 million. The evidence that I've seen in Poland, and I even went and helped at an orphanage there, they've done just a fantastic job. They've been incredibly hospitable, hosting, doing most of the heavy lifting. Why do the Ukrainians want to go there? And I didn't realize this, I now know this. It's because if you speak Ukrainian, you can actually understand Polish.
Right.
Which I didn't realize, the close connection in the languages. So of all the border countries, that's why they're going there. But I would say, in addition, the Poles themselves have been amazing. And I think, if sort of the UK is number one on Putin's, hate list, I think probably the Poles come a close second. And they're very critical of Putin in particular. And I think the Ukrainians feel safe there, comfortable there, and most of them don't want to leave there. I mean, even though we were trying to help those that wanted to go to Germany or to France or to Latvia, they were usually people who had some form of family connection in those countries already. Most actually either now want to stay in Ukraine on the west side, or they want to be in Poland. When it comes to countries that are helping, just to put it in context, so not that I want to pick on Germany, but I will. So Germany has said, they've upped the amount of money they're giving to Ukraine. I think they're saying they're giving 1 or 1.5 billion in some form of aid in total. Okay, they are spending roughly $1 billion a day on fossil fuels. So they are So let's just say they have spent, I think, 45 billion to date, giving money to Russia to pay for their war machine, yet have given 1.5 million to Ukraine. So they, to the tune of almost 30 to 40 to 1, they are funding Russia's war machine that much more than the support they're giving to Ukraine. Those are stark numbers, and I hate to say it, but that is the reality. You could choose the Netherlands, Holland, same thing. Holland has given less than $1 billion to Ukraine, but has spent 26 billion funding Russia's war machine by simply buying fossil fuels. And I appreciate it's very difficult to pivot and to switch from somebody you've been highly dependent on to not. But I think the US has to, and they're the only country that can do this, put a lot of pressure on the Gulf countries to increase their supply, to try and bridge some of that gap at least. Otherwise, as this war goes on, Russia's going to get, 30 to 40 times more money from Europe than the Ukrainians are, even though we're supposed to be helping and supporting the Ukrainians in their war effort. I think the country I'm most disappointed with is Hungary. I think Viktor Orban is appalling. I think that certainly NATO, as well as the EU, should be putting more pressure on him. I think, we can't have a Putin sympathizer, in our midst, and that's what they are, other than Serbia, who, of course, are as well. But I think overall, if I look at who is doing a good job in taking refugees, other than the border countries, actually it's Canada.
Right.
And So when you go into Poland, you go to the refugee centers, the Canadians have an amazing system set up there to really facilitate the movement of people from Poland to Canada. The paperwork is simplified, it's easy and everything else. In the UK, the paperwork is still very clunky, cumbersome. Even I've got a mother and daughter staying with me from Ukraine. The daughter, who speaks English, almost perfect English, was in tears trying to understand the paperwork even when she got here and needed my wife to sort of help take her through it. So we have to do a better job if we want people to come here. Otherwise, and the government definitely does want people to come here, and there are 250,000 families that said, please, send Ukrainians to us, which is brilliant. But we have to, if the government wants to encourage that, it has to make sure that the paperwork and the systems it is set up is encouraging for Ukrainians to do that. And the Ukrainian viral media things move around very quickly. In the UK, while attractive on the surface to come to, is seen as the most difficult country to come to.
So do you think there's any reason for the bureaucracy here with the Homes for Ukraine scheme? Do you think there's any reason for that being particularly bad and not,
Yes, it's a cultural problem.
Is it? Right.
It's a cultural Home Office problem. It is not, I know people like to blame Priti Patel, but I think a lot of the times Priti gets incredibly frustrated because of the culture in the Home Office, which is just say no. We are not a welcoming country to anybody who wants to come here, period. And that culture needs to change. I think, it's not like, let's say, the Channel crossings, where there are lots of young men who are effectively economic migrants. They're not what I would refer to as genuine refugees. That these are women and children coming. They are not a threat to security or anything like that. They want temporary refuge, and they almost all, everyone I've spoken to, want to go back to their country. Why? Because they have their brothers, their fathers, their uncles, their sons fighting there. And once they've got their freedom back, they want to go home. They don't want to live here forever. And we just have to, as I said, make it easier for people to come here.
Right. So outside of that's one way that the UK is trying to help, is the Homes for Ukraine scheme. Is there anything else that you think the UK should be doing that they aren't already, to help the situation in Ukraine, even, specifically in relation to refugees? I mean,
I think they could, and this is what I fed back, it would be great to have like a hub, for example, in Lviv, where most of Ukrainians now seem to be congregating. So when they move away from the east to the west, their first point of call is Lviv, and their second point, if they cross the border, is Warsaw. So we need two, like the Canadians have, active hubs, which are helping people through the paperwork and getting them, in a position where they can come to the UK fairly quickly. So that would be my one big recommendation to do. The other feedback I have from the ground is we're doing a great job supplying heavy equipment, heavy military armor now, brilliant. But when you speak to ordinary soldiers on the ground, many of them are not even having basic equipment like helmets, flak jackets, boots, night goggles so they can see people moving at night. So I think there's what I would refer to as relatively inexpensive, low-hanging fruit we can do as a country in supplying them very basic military equipment so they can protect themselves. The second thing is medical support. So when I was in Kharkiv, I went to a medical center, which is run by women there, and they don't have enough money for burn creams. There's a lot of burns when you're in a war. Lots of people get burnt, so they literally the women are making their own homemade cream for burns, and we should be supplying that sort of stuff. So there's some very basic things that we can be doing. Also, insulin is what they need. Antibiotics they need. Ibuprofen. All very, very low-level stuff that we could be supplying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You mentioned that you took in a Ukrainian family and you'd gone through the Homes for Ukraine scheme yourself.
Yeah.
What was What was your? I mean, you'd already sort of hinted that it wasn't perfect.
No.
What was your experience of that system, and how long did it actually take? From the application process to them coming over.
Yeah. So the daughter got hers in 4 days, and the mum, after a lot of me jumping up and down, sending messages to Pretty's office, because Pretty is my MP in Essex.
Yeah.
So I had direct access to the Home Secretary. It took 3.5 weeks, and that's even with the Home Secretary on your side.
Yeah.
So there, as I said, there's a structural problem, a cultural problem in the Home Office that needs addressing. I think more importantly, there are, as I said, 200,000 plus people who have offered to give homes to Ukrainians, but there's no communication. If someone has been kind enough to say, yes, I'm going to save the government a lot of money because they don't need to provide the housing, I'm going to provide the housing, it's very important you keep people in touch with what's going on with that in order to maintain goodwill. So I think there is not enough communication with people who are offering to help either.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's a good insight, and it's quite good to sort of hear from someone who's gone through that. And even with, as you say, with your connections, it's still that 3.5 weeks is just too long. I just wanted to sort of move on to sort of some slightly broader points now. So sort of we've seen in the news in the last few days that Finland and Sweden are looking to make an application to join NATO. I just wanted to see what your opinion was on that, and the implications of that going forward, especially in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, I think it's amazing that Sweden and Finland have always maintained throughout the Cold War, whenever the pressure was at its worst, always maintained neutrality. Yeah. They did not want to join NATO. But I think what's happened now is that Putin is seen as such a threat in the way he's unilaterally gone into Ukraine that he's now certainly forced the Finns, who are the first people now to have said they want to join NATO. I think the Swedes will follow soon. This is such an own goal because he will now have another 800 miles of NATO on his border, on his sort of northwestern flank. And he's saying, there will be consequences. What consequences? He can't even capture one town in Ukraine. So what consequences can there possibly be? And to make threats to Sweden and Finland and say, if you dare do that, you will be punished. Well, no, these are voluntary things. These are things they had done out of respect to Russia, not to provoke them. But the fact that Putin has provoked to such an extent, and certainly pulled together NATO in the EU in a way that none of us could ever have imagined. And this is the consequence, is that he will now have another 800 miles of NATO on his border.
Yeah, absolutely. So, sorry, just going back to the sort of Ukraine and the stuff that you've seen personally. There's been reports in the last few days of citizens being, killed by Russian soldiers, and there's been reports that there's actually been CCTV footage of this. Do you think that there is evidence from these videos of war crimes, and do you think that these individuals are likely in the immediate future to be held accountable for these war crimes? And do you think the Russian state specifically is going to be held accountable for these in the near future? Do you see this?
Yes, I mean, I think just with Bucha alone, you could just look at one small town outside of Kyiv and see the destruction there. So the good thing about this is that the other evidence they have are either photos of after what's happened, or of verbal accounts of whether it's rape or destruction of individuals. This is a video record, which is rare to have, of Russians doing what they're doing. So this is, again, an important piece of the evidence that I think will eventually come up.
Yeah, absolutely. So for you personally, have you got any plans to go back to Ukraine in the next few weeks? I mean, I know you've been there a lot in the last few months. Have you got any plans? What's your plans in the immediate future?
Yeah, so now I've got Maris, who I'm working with, who's from Latvia, who's based himself in Lviv. We now, having been over there, met with various local government officials, mayors, So we're now have a good network in place. So the next thing I want to do is to try and scale up a little more what I'm doing, because we have now access to up to 16 buses, which is great. But I particularly want to work with the mayor of Kharkiv to see, who are the vulnerable people that we can move. Now, I know the UK government is keen to have more people here, but I think if you're in Kharkiv, as coming to the UK is a little bit like saying go to Australia. It's just so far away. So I think our initial thing is to take them to Lviv, those that want to go, and then let them have a choice. We can say, these are your options, of which the UK will be one of them. You can't sort of move people from A to B and say, well, we're moving you because we want to sort of take you to the UK, even though, we believe it's a land flowing of milk and honey or whatever. There's a lot of other emotional things going in with them. Most important of which is a lot of them just simply don't want to leave the country.
Yeah.
And if they do leave the country, they don't want to go that far away. They're happy to go to Poland because most of them don't speak another language. So if they're going to go somewhere, they want to go to a country where they feel they can be understood. And I think Poland is it. So I think it's important that the EU itself gives Poland as much support that it can do, because it's doing most of the heavy lifting for the refugees.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's all the questions we have. So, is there anything else that you want to add at all?
No. I think that's I think it's fine. I think I think my view is this war will continue to shift.
Yeah.
So I believe the conflict will be a sort of frozen, semi-frozen conflict on the east, where I think the Russians won't make much progress, and in the south, as they try to take Odessa and link up with Transnistria. I don't think they'll be able to do that. But what they will then do is they'll go back to targeting supply lines in the west, which will mean potentially bombs in Kyiv and Lviv, and particularly the rail lines, which are bringing in a lot of the equipment. But if you're bringing in equipment and those lines are getting bombed, it's also stopping people leaving. So I think, and I don't want this to happen, but I believe the demand for the services we're providing, which is moving women and children to safety from where there is conflict, that is likely to increase, and that is likely to move back from the east where we are now to the west as well. So, you and I could probably be sitting here in 3 months' time. I'm hoping we're not, but I suspect we will be. And I will be talking about, having moved a lot more people, but a lot of those people being moved from the west, maybe across the border to safety.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we all hope that won't be the case. But no, thank you for joining us today. And I'm sure we'll speak again about this again in the future. So
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers. So if you want to join the conversation, just leave a comment or subscribe, or join the conversation at chamberuk.com.